Hey everyone, welcome back. Expanding the Zone. I'm Shayne Combs here with my brother Matt, and we have a show tonight that has been in the works for quite some time, and it's something that we're becoming more and more passionate about as leaders of young people. Something that we take really serious, and we feel like we really need to become more educated, be more involved, and leading the path to making far more awareness than maybe is in the current state. And this show 35 is going to be titled Mental Health with Today's High School Athletes. And Matt, as I welcome you to the show, I know you and I had this on our radar through the whole shutdown of the COVID-19 and the decisions going into kids getting to play sports, not getting to play sports, not being in that normal routine. And then obviously over the summer, one of the major sports things that takes place is the Olympics. And one of the major things in the Olympics with the Simone Biles news where she was made the decision to put mental health out in front of her performing, and kind of really trying to take care of herself in that way. And obviously that had a lot of coverage in terms of the news and national, just not in sports, but really in the overall news. So I guess when you combine all that together, you and I felt like now was the time. And I know we've spent a lot of time over the last couple of weeks putting this together, and we really wanted to make sure that we were able to offer something a little unique in our coverage. I'll kind of pass it on to you there and kind of talk people through how we arrived and how we hope to go about this topic here in tonight's show.
Yeah, Shayne, like you said, I mean, it's the mental health issue has been one that we have considered addressing, over the time we've done this podcast. It's a sensitive one, obviously. It's one that, we felt if we were going to do it, we had to make sure we probably had some help in addressing it. I mean, you and I think, feel pretty comfortable talking about leadership issues and coaching issues based on our, two decades plus of doing that stuff. But when it comes to, the mental health side of things, we're far from experts at that. And we wanted to bring in somebody that has some expertise in that area. So we're going to have a guest. And for the people that watch our show or listen to the show, I think this is only the second time, Shayne, in 30 some episodes that we've had a guest. And so it's something we typically don't do. But like I said, we really felt led in this particular case to have somebody with some expertise in it. So we're going to have somebody by the name of Julie Arthur. Julie is a clinical counselor with 20 right around 20 years of private practice experience. She counsels many teenage kids, so she has a lot of background with the age group of the athletes we talk about on the show, and I think she gives a unique perspective of being a sports mom to her son. Graduated just a couple years ago, played for me at Vinton County. So I've known Julie for a while. So she has that perspective of as a mother watching her son grow up as an athlete and deal with the challenges that the kids deal with today. And then obviously she has that area of expertise as a counselor. So we're excited to have her on. We interviewed her, and we're going to use several clips of her interview throughout our show today to sort of lend some expertise to what we're talking about.
Well, yeah, you mentioned the interview, Matt, and I, one of the things that jumped out at me, right off the bat was a comment that she had mentioned about during the shutdown process and the kids not getting to play all the way through, obviously back into this school year, still a little bit up in the air in terms of what we're going to be doing. And, the number of situations and claims that have been made in terms of the age group that right around the time that we work with each and every day. The research showing, one research was talking the 11 to 17 group. I think she mentioned an age group there in the clip of 13 to 18, and it just got me thinking that, right off the bat with that particular age group, it made me even more aware that I have a responsibility to educate myself even more. You think about one thing that's changed in our career is, remember all of the classes in terms of the injuries, concussions, handling, the different signs of heat and all those different things and all these physical things. This has really become something that has opened my eyes and made me more aware that I have a responsibility as a middle school principal and as a coach of high school athletes, that I need to educate myself on more and more and more, because it's becoming a key component in helping young people along. So I guess that's kind of the first thing that comes to my mind. What's your take in terms of when you look at it through the eyes of an athletic director, as a coach, and the responsibility as a parent, little league coach, all of those different things. I mean, when you see these age groups show up in some of the material, and her as our expert here on the show talking about this particular thing, pretty eye-opening.
Yeah, I think she said something. You mentioned Simone Biles, right? I mean, that was the most recent mental health, I guess, moment, right, where it really became right out there in the public eye, was when Simone Biles basically backed out of her events at the Olympics, right? Opted out due to mental health issues. And of course, the reaction to that was worldwide surprise. And her being, arguably the, most famous Olympian, certainly right now, but probably, maybe one of the most famous ones ever, especially on the gymnastics side. So that really brought this issue to light. But I'm going to show a clip here in a second where Julie talked a little bit about how, we as a fan think, okay, this young lady had a mental health issue just at the wrong time. Oh man, what a bad time for her to have that issue as she's trained all these years. But what Julie mentions in this clip is that, that didn't just start happening. Typically mental health issues have been there for a while, and these people have been struggling with them for an extended period of time. And what you're saying is true off that, Shayne. It's important for us to know sort of the history of our student athletes that we come in contact with. Do we have the type of relationship where we know a little bit about them? We're not going to know everything about them, obviously. And you have an incoming freshman, you're not going to just automatically know everything they've been through, but trying to, like you said, learn a little bit about the kids that you coach, develop that relationship, and then obviously educate yourself in this area to know some of the things to look for and all that. I'm going to go ahead and play the clip where she talks a little bit about, where Julie talks a little bit about the history and knowing, understanding that these mental health issues go back a little ways, and the importance of understanding that as a coach.
I guess when I started reading her story last night, I think everybody's focused on this moment, but when you dig back in her history, or articles I read talked a lot about how there's the history of the allegations that came out with the sexual abuse. And she's the last gymnast that is performing still during the Olympics when all this came out in 2018. But I looked at her history of 2018 is, one of the articles said that is when her parents really started to notice that she was declining. And back in Texas, at one point, they found her crying on the floor in the gym at their home. Right. And that's when she agreed to start going to therapy. So I think, she had said at one point, you just see what we have on social media. You don't see us as people and what we're dealing with behind the scenes. So I think it was like a long history. Nobody sees or taking into account the whole history of what she's been through the last couple of years.
Well, Matt, what was really intriguing about that part of the interview what was two things for me. Number one, from a personal standpoint, it really reminded me the importance of knowing the history of athletes and relationships and people and all of those different things. And again, that responsibility I was talking about of learning more and more. But two, I thought about it from a sports perspective and a sports fan. You know, when you think of an Olympic athlete, they're really only on center stage that one window out of 4 years. You know,
Right.
particularly when you think of Michael Phelps, who's in my notes a little bit tonight, and swimming, or Simone Biles here, and as a gymnast, it's a situation where, if I'm being honest, I don't know that I follow those particular athletes in the world championships, or when they were coming up through college, or some of the different ways you would an NBA player, an NFL player, or to some extent even, you know, a young Major League Baseball player coming up through the ranks. It's a situation where this is when they're on center stage, and because of the nature of their sport, where they basically have this one opportunity every 4 years, it just magnifies the whole situation. And I think that really adds to something here. What was your reaction? Do you follow a little bit what I'm saying there from a sports fan, as I try to just put it into perspective a little bit?
Yeah, I do. I think what was difficult, Shayne, for some people is because, like you said, she's involved in a sport that's not necessarily in the public eye,
Right.
you know, 9 months a year, every year, like either football, basketball, baseball, whatever sport you typically follow. And I think because of that, you know, sometimes as fans, we're in that mindset. I mean, let's face it, I think, you know, I'll just be honest, you know, one of my first reactions when she withdrew was, you know, oh, wow, you know, obviously you're surprised, but at the same time, you're thinking to yourself, man, you know, is it like, isn't there a way she might just be able to figure out a way to grind through it, right? And just kind of get through it, because maybe Simone Biles at 70% could still win a silver medal or could still win you know, but then again, you start looking at it as, you know, in a sport like hers, does she risk career-ending injuries if she's not completely focused on what she's doing? And does it become a danger physically, you know? So all those things you take into consideration. But I think, because I think, Shayne, I don't know, you're in a mindset sometimes when you're in a team sport, okay? And let's face it, gymnastics is, I feel like gymnastics is an individual sport with a team component. Does that make sense to it? It's almost like track and field in high school. There's a team component, there's a team score, but at the end of the day, it's somewhat of an individual sport with a team component to it. And I think when you've participated in team sports your whole life, such as basketball or baseball or whatever, your first thought is you got to find a way to suck it up and grind it out. But that attitude and that viewpoint, if you're not careful, can add to the problem a little bit of not helping people, you know, with these types of issues, because you know, again, it's just something we're not used to as athletes and as coaches. You don't see much of it. Can you imagine, you know, if LeBron James in Game 5 of the NBA Finals said, you know, I can't go, you know, I mentally am not in a place where I can go. Well, he would come under, I'm guessing, some scrutiny for that, quite a bit of scrutiny for that. Whereas Shayne, if he couldn't go because of a knee injury, what would people say? People would say, well, you know, hey, I mean, you know, I feel terrible for him. The guy had an unfortunate injury. Do we need to get to, and I asked Julie this question too, Shayne, maybe we can play this clip here in a second, but I'll ask you first. Do we need to get to a point where we treat mental health issues the same as we would a physical injury?
Well, absolutely, and I think that's something I definitely want to get to in just a second. But I wanted to back up to a point you just made. I think what happens on the mental, I think you made a very honest observation there, Matt, of the way a lot of people, not in a mean or an, you know, I don't even know, not that they don't care.
It's just they don't understand.
That's it. They don't understand, and that was the part I think that through this whole process has really started to hit me, is it's the mental health side of things, where you are so uncomfortable because you don't know. Well, think about what happens a lot of times is when you don't know or you're uncomfortable, what do you oftentimes do? You kind of ignore it, right? You kind of change the subject. You kind of, you steer away from it a little bit. I thought of a quote one time that really stuck out to me as I was in a class where it was talking about H.P. Lovecraft, American writer. I'll read it here to even make sure I quote it correctly. The oldest and strongest emotion of mankind is fear, and the oldest and strongest kind of fear is fear of the unknown. Yeah, I mean, it's one of those things of, when we don't know, there's two things we can do. We can either try to research and find out, we can try to experience it. But again, if we don't have any experience and then we're not really willing to find out, what do we usually do? We kind of ignore it, or we steer away, or then we let our personal bias, kind of jump out there as our honest reaction. And those are all problems. I thought the most interesting feedback came from Michael Phelps, because in our lifetime, Matt, maybe help me here a little bit. You're a little older than me. Maybe Carl Lewis, Michael Phelps. We're probably talking a pretty short list, right? So I thought Michael Phelps kind of speaking up. He certainly battled a lot of this stuff throughout his career. He kind of talked about it's okay to not be okay. He said we're human, we're not perfect, the ups and downs. And he said he went through a time where he felt so worthless, he couldn't get out of bed. You're talking about a guy who has 23 gold medals. You see what I'm saying? So I think that's where it starts. Even before we take it another step to the physical side, do you see that connection in terms of like it's hard for us to comprehend sometimes people going through these particular mental issues when on the surface everything looks so good.
I don't think there's any question. It's funny you say that. I used the analogy. It's almost like, I feel like with mental health, it's almost like people who have never battled an addiction, let's say of any kind. Let's say you're fortunate enough in your life where you've never battled an addiction with, say, a tobacco product or alcohol or anything, right? How hard is it for that person to understand somebody that does battle that? In other words, if you've never used tobacco in your life and you see somebody smoking 3 packs a day, what's your initial reaction? Like, why don't they just quit smoking? Why would they do that? They know it's unhealthy. They ought to just do it. Whereas the person who's smoking 3 packs a day saying, I know it's unhealthy, but I can't quit. I'm trying to quit. I tried to quit. I can't. So it's almost like I'm using that analogy almost with the mental health of, if you've never struggled with those issues, like for instance, I know somebody who on the surface has everything going for him, great family, great kids, great job, but occasionally he struggles with some depression. And he's had to take some medication for it, and he'll go through bouts of it. And your first reaction is, wonder what this guy has to be down in the dumps about. But that's an ignorant view, because when you start to educate yourself about it, it's not that he's down in the dumps over something that's happened. It is an actual chemical. It's a disease. You know what I mean? It's an illness that he's fighting and struggling. And again, it goes back to that, comparing it, like I said, to a physical injury. I think sometimes we just feel like mental issues are more of, well, you just got to get through that, get your mind right, and it's not that easy for some people. I don't know if I'm making sense with that, but it's like, it is again, it is so hard to understand something that you've never struggled with yourself. And I think as coaches and as leaders, if we're dealing with kids that are going through something that we've never went through, how many times do you see a coach say, well, I don't understand why this kid's late to practice. I don't understand why this kid, I wasn't late to practice. I didn't do that. Well, maybe this kid didn't have the same home life we had. Maybe he didn't have parents who made sure that he learned time management, or make sure that he had 3 square meals a day and enough rest to where he was, you see what I mean? It's so easy to sort of judge another person when you haven't walked a mile in their shoes. And I think sometimes with mental health, especially, that happens a lot just because we don't understand it.
Well, and that sets up even better what you're talking about. I think you make such a great, you know, example or analogy, comparing it over to the physical injury. You know, if someone were to have a sprained ankle, if someone were to hurt the knee, if someone were to have a hurt shoulder, broken bone, all of those different things,
Right.
we in no way question those things. And I think that's the situation that we have to step forward, and we have to educate ourselves, and we have to be more aware of these particular things as coaches. Because again, I think what's happened is we've been asked to educate ourselves more as an athletic trainer over the course of just my career here in the last 20 years, in terms of signs of the concussion, as I said earlier, signs of the heat, signs of those different things, signs of athletes protecting them from his or herself, all of
Right.
those different things. And I'm not so sure that well, I'm positive that the mental health has not been given the same attention and awareness. And I think that's kind of what I've learned through this whole process of taking these relationships and taking these things and trying to, if you don't have the experience and you don't know, trying to learn more and more about it, and educating ourselves. Don't you feel like that's kind of the foundation, or the start of the professional development that coaches and leaders are going to have to go through?
Yeah, I do. And let me, I'll tell you what, Shane, let me play a couple clips here, some things Julie had to say that I think touches on some of the things we just talked about, because I had asked her about the mental, like almost, for lack of a better way to say it, the mental injury versus the physical injury, and how we approach those things. And I'd asked her a little bit about, you know, why she thought maybe we haven't gotten to that point yet where we look at those two things the same. And here's what she had to say.
I'm not sure how to go about it, because one of my things was, I've noticed, like with schools getting back in sessions, a lot of my kids have dropped out because they're like, well, I can't miss practice to come to therapy, or I can't miss, and I understand, you know, practice is important, or I can't miss school to come to therapy. But I also get kids will say, well, I don't want my coach to know I'm in therapy, because then they might not feel like mentally I can play. Like there's a secret. I think that they won't take it seriously, or mental health people get, I work in an urgent care, so I work with a lot of nurses, and they're like, we can't do what you do because mental health makes people very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
Because I don't think they understand it. And if we hear depression, we go to the worst case scenario. When sometimes maybe it's just a situational depression of things are, you know, my parents are divorcing and I just need a neutral party to talk to. I think maybe part of it is just we don't talk about mental health. Like we know it's there, but coaches don't address, hey, you know, is there anything going on that you can talk to me about? Or here are some numbers of therapists, or here's crisis line or text numbers that you can address, or maybe normalizing it of, you know, teenage years are hard. We've all been through things, and sometimes we need to talk to someone, and there's no shame in that. Because I'll be honest, most of my kids that I work with, who I get that are like 16, a lot of the parents will say, well, they've been asking for counseling for a couple years, but I just thought it was a phase, or it would get better, or I just couldn't find time to take them. If you haven't been through it, I think, especially with depression, I hear all the time, I just put on a smile and keep going. So everybody thinks it's okay. So they don't really see the struggles that are going on behind the scenes of, like, you know, people that I have with severe depression are like, people don't understand why it drains me just to take a shower. Like the energy to get up and do that, I don't have. And when you were saying like everything looks perfect, a lot of my, you know, I've worked with different athletes in counseling, and then I've worked with other kids who will say, well, those are their popular kids. They don't have any problems. They're in sports, or they're from a good home. And then a lot of my kids that I work with will say, I don't let people know because everybody assumes my life is quote unquote perfect. Those kids work harder to hide it even more.
Well, Matt, her comments her comments about it being a secret and having that trust and some different things were very, very powerful messages, and something that really hit home with me. Comparison on the physical side is I know how we oftentimes are trying to protect the athlete from his or herself, as I said earlier. And I think, let's face it, don't you have kids all the time that they might say something to a teammate or to a coach, but they're trying to be secretive. They don't want you to know that the ankle hurts. Or in my sport of baseball, the common one is the arm, right?
Right.
The pitcher has the sore arm in the second or third inning. The last thing they want is Coach Combs to know, because they know I'm going to take them out. Yeah, but so on this mental side, it's even more so, right? Like, do they even have that comfort level or trust to even talk to a teammate? Will they send a sign to a teammate or to an assistant coach? Maybe not. So that was that connection I made. Do you see that connection? How sometimes I totally get that whole secretive or trust. I don't want anyone to know, because I see that even on the physical side, and I would imagine on the mental side, it's even more of an issue to have that comfort level, to just speak up and say it.
Yeah, I do, Shane. I see that as being an issue. In fact, I had asked Julie this question. I said at one point in our interview, I said, because I've always wondered this, Shane, and I don't know if this is where you wanted to go next or not, but it just struck me as I listened to her talk right there. I'd asked her, do you feel like we have more mental health issues today, okay, than we did when we were kids? Because Julie and I are a similar age. I said, like, back when we were in high school, I said, were they there and we just didn't diagnose it, or do we have more now? And I want to play this clip, and then let's come back, Shane, because I think after this clip, we can talk a little bit about where you were going, and a little bit, let's tie these together, because she talks about how, she talks a little bit about coping skills of today's generation, and sort of that whole dynamic of how kids grow up and what they grow up around right now. And then she also talked a little bit about some statistics. She gave some numbers of how there have been some increases in mental health referrals and things like that. So let's go ahead and play that, and then let's come back from that, Shane, and really dig into that.
I think it's always been there, but each generation presents it differently. Mm-hmm. Like, our generation did not have the social media that we had to contend with, or what we put out in public on social media, we had to live up to off. I think it is skyrocketing for some reason. I'm not sure why. Like, one of the trainings I just went to said that between 2005 and 2011, there's been a 28% increase in medications being prescribed to kids. That's kind of that's huge. Also, it said 8% of youths between 12 and 17 have had a major depressive episode each year, but only 40% receive treatment for it. So I think it is on the rise, and I don't know if it's because youths talk about it more, but I think it's also, there's a trend too, because in the training, they kind of focus on there is no skill in a pill, and that these kids are not being taught coping skills to deal with things. Right. And how important, one thing was talking about how important it is to learn social skills, is like, that social face-to-face interaction that kids don't get anymore. Like, I have a lot of kids that will say, well, I'm more social than I ever was, but they struggle with that, having a conversation with someone. So I think it's always been here. It's just, we're more aware of it, and each generation presents differently with the issues that they're having. And I think a lot of it, and what I hear from kids too, is, we were talking about how the Olympic, like, they're coaching and all we've got kids now who are starting at such a younger age on travel teams, and that intense schedule of, I've got kids doing soccer and football, like they're just right. involved in so much that the kids are like, I don't really want to play anymore, but I don't want to diss my parents. You know, I see a lot of that. A lot of times for my kids, it's like the parents, and that may not be the parents' expectations, but that's just what the child views. And I think just having that communication, because I see that a lot, that parents and the child doesn't have the communication of just saying, hey, if at any time you decide you don't want to play, it's okay. Or are you happy doing this?
Well, Matt, as I listened to that, I was really intrigued by the thought of Little League sports. I think people have talked to, listened over the years to SVC Sports Talk and have followed some of my coverage. They know I have a great passion for working with young people and some different things. And the comments about some of the travel teams and some of the younger age and so forth really, really struck something with me there in terms of the time, the money, the travel, and at such a young age. It's no longer just a little Saturday morning little league thing.
Right.
It's such an investment, and parents are so involved, and I think that probably makes parents even hungrier for success, and the kids, of more and more responsibility. I guess I would even throw it to you as a parent first. What's your level of concern as you get your kids involved in things in terms of wanting to push them to be the very best they can be, certainly want to make sure that they're getting enough things in their life, but balancing that, because it needs to be fun. You need to learn, you need to have life skills. And sometimes, let's face it, the level of Little League sports have gone way past that. I mean, the pressure that I probably didn't experience for the first time as an athlete, if I'm being honest, until 8th, 9th, 10th grade. There's some people experiencing in, 3rd, 4th grade travel leagues and championship weekends now. Is that fair? I mean,
yeah. And I don't even know, in some cases, it may be the pressure to win or whatever, but I think the pressure is even more about, like what Julie had to say in that one clip about how she talked about the pressure of not letting your parents down. Like, okay,
right.
my parents really love this. They've invested this time. They're driving me to Cincinnati once a week for practice. And then we're spending Thursday through Sunday over in Indiana playing in a tournament. And then you know what I mean? So all of a sudden, if a kid gets to the point where they don't want to do that, do they have guts enough to look at their parents and say, hey, I don't want to do this, I mean, because kids at that age, especially, that youth age, they want to please, they want their parents to be proud of them. They want, and it is, with me, it's a fine line, because you want to give your kids opportunities. My son right now is trying to play some flag football and fall baseball. And even though those are both locally, it concerned me. Like, am I trying to do I have him doing too much? Is it okay for him to play a flag football game at 1 o'clock in the afternoon and then go play a baseball game at 3? I've talked to him about it. He wants to do it. They're both local. We're not traveling a lot. So, hopefully, I think that's okay. But I think as a parent, it's important to keep those communication lines open, so that if it does get to a point where it's too much on a kid, when I hear, hey, my son played 87 baseball games this summer. Well, okay. I mean, I'm, it's great that you're able to give the kid an opportunity, but is that healthy? I don't know. I mean, maybe for some kids it is. Maybe some kids, that's perfect. They love to play and they want to play. But, I think for some kids, maybe that's too much. And again, like what Julie's talking about with the mental health side of this is, does that lead to situations where kids, don't really know how to tell their parents that, hey, this is bogging me down. This is bothering me. She even said, if you remember, that sometimes athletes don't even know where to turn. It's like you have to have your parents to consent to even get mental health treatment or counseling.
And the hard part with Ohio is, you have to have a parent. Some states allow 12-year-olds to consent to their own mental health treatment, 12 or 13. But in Ohio, you have to have a parent, and mom and dad have to sign the paperwork legally for you to go and give consent for you to get treatment. So that's sometimes a barrier also and therapy. is a time commitment. You know, most of my kids I see weekly to every other week to once a month, depending on how they're doing. And that's a huge commitment on everybody's part. And I think as a coach, you guys are in a hard time right now with COVID and
Yeah.
everything being shut down and not normal. Because
Right.
the other thing that I had found, I did not realize that a study found that in March of 2020, mental health for ages 13 to 18 claims, because they did a thing on billable claims for private insurance companies, had went up 97%. And in March and in April, it went up 103% in the number of claims that they had received for kids from mental health services. I've said in my 19 years, this is the first time I have a waiting list of 20 plus people with 8 weeks plus to even get an appointment. It's just kind of skyrocketed.
Well, and the thing that jumps out at me on the age group, I mentioned this earlier in the show, when I started hearing some of these data points use ages 10 to 17 or 13 to 18, I guess I look back at the middle school age and I think to, what an open house looks like, or I think to kids coming upstairs at our middle school, or, a lot of times I remember my first day of junior high, and that's such an age of where we're starting to step away from our parents a little bit more, experiencing a little bit more independence. I'm sure when you're out at certain public events, as your kids get to certain ages and you're saying, yeah, okay, you can, like, at the Ross County Fair, okay, you can go off with your friends, check back
Right.
to me a little bit. And for the
Right.
first time, you're giving them a little bit of that independence. And yeah, you're still trying to monitor and you're still trying to do some of those things. But like, I say all that to make this connection of, I think as kids are going through some of that independence for the first time, there does have to be a comfort level, and there has to be a trust and responsibility that, if not their parents, is it a teacher, is it a guidance counselor, is it different people? There has to be those relationships in their life where they feel like that trust and those secrets, as we kind of hear in our research of this, that they have the comfort to step forward and say, hey, I'm having trouble with this. It's okay to say that. And that's a dynamic that, again, as someone who works with middle schools students each and every day, that I just feel like I have a complete responsibility. I kind of look at it, we use something a lot of times in our leadership in terms of care. We got to have compassion, we got to have awareness, responsibility, and we have to educate. And boy,
Right.
does that fit here. I mean, we as leaders have to be far more compassionate about this and have an awareness that it's out there. And then to me, it goes further than that, Matt. I think there's a responsibility that we have to our young people to educate ourselves and make far more connection to these things, because again, I know as a teacher and a coach, a lot of times far beyond the X and O or so forth, we don't think anything of being a little bit of an athletic trainer, or a little bit of a treasurer, or a little bit of a secretary, all those different roles, right?
Right.
To me, a little bit of a mental coach probably applies here a little bit. And I think as you look at it through athletic administration, I would even ask you, is that something that we've failed, miserably in terms of kind of making a connection to as leaders?
Yeah, I think it's funny, when you're in a leadership position, uh, you have to sign up for the whole thing. In other words, it can't just be, well, okay, I want this particular job. I want to be an athletic director. I want to be a principal, uh, whatever the leadership position is, and then shy away from the tough issues and shy away from the leadership issues. I just don't buy that. I think that mental health is one of those tough issues. For instance, okay, as an athletic director, um, I have been one to uh, I don't know what the right word is, advocate for or whatever, or suggest that athletes get vaccinated at the high school level. Okay, now does that make everybody happy? No, because it's a controvert for whatever reason. This vaccination has become a controversial issue, right? So when I say that, there are going to be some people that roll their eyes or say, well, what, hey, I'm not comfortable with that. Well, my point is this: if I'm a leader And I'm an athletic administrator, and my job is to do what I think is best for high school athletes. If I think what is best is for them to get vaccinated so that they run less of a risk of getting COVID, and B, that they don't have to quarantine and they can play their entire season. Okay. If that's what I truly believe, I have a responsibility to lead. Okay. Even if my leadership ruffles a feather or people don't like it. The same with mental health, Shayne. I think it's real easy for us as leaders just to say, I don't want to touch that. That's a little uncomfortable. Well, is that a good enough reason not to touch it? Because it's uncomfortable? You see what I'm saying? Do we have a responsibility to start to use our platform to open up those conversations about mental health? What if we save a kid's life or help save a kid's life? What if we put a kid in a situation where he or she gets help that helps them live a happier, more productive life? Isn't that what we're here for? I mean, isn't that what we're supposed to do? So I think, yeah, I mean, I know here as we wrap up this show, we're going to talk a little bit, and we're going to play some clips from where Julie, when I asked her the questions of, okay, what do we do as coaches? What do we do as leaders? How can we be a part of the solution, right? Which you and I always talk about on this show. But I think that part of the solution is to have guts enough to talk about it. I mean, it's simple communication, isn't it? Somewhat.
Well, and yeah, I mean, certainly when you say that, we're not making it out to be a simple thing, but it is a simple step.
No,
for
a simple
the
step,
leaders,
but the whole
a simple
solution
step
is
for
not
the
simple.
leaders
Right.
to get involved. That's what I take from your answer is as a leader, what do we do? Well, again, that's why we reach out and we're asking someone who's been more involved in this, what are some of the things you do? But I think the whole purpose of us doing the interview, the whole purpose of us doing this show is to start a discussion of solutions for leaders and for coaches. So Matt, go ahead and play that clip if you would, and then as we get into our closing comments here, our closing thoughts, final thoughts, I kind of have some things that I want to throw at you still.
Yeah, I basically had asked her, I'd asked Julie as a coach, okay, really kind of a two-headed question here in a way, but like, one, how do we recognize the mental health issues amongst our athletes? When I was asking Julie this question, it was more from a coaching standpoint. So as a coach, how do we recognize in our players when they're having some mental health issues? And then later on in the conversation, and I'll go ahead and play this clip as well, I had asked her, are there some steps we can take to be proactive? Are there, I'd even ask, could we bring in some guest speakers at the beginning of the year and talk a little bit about, are there some tools we could use to help gauge whether our players, have some issues? I know, like on the OHSA physical form on the front page, there's a thing now that says, I feel depressed, and it has like boxes you can check, like never, almost daily, all the way, the whole scale. And, are there some tools like that we could use with our athletes to get out ahead of this thing and to figure out, like we talked about with Simone Biles earlier, is there a history here? Has this been, have they been fighting some things for a while? So really, those were kind of the questions I had for Julie, and here's her response to that.
What we look for as clinicians is like, is there any changes in the behavior? Has the kid always kind of been known as having a bad attitude? Like, is that just who they've always been, or is this a new development? I think a lot of it is communication between like teachers that they have, or previous coaches, or teammates of if there's a concern, because that was one thing I read for like the this year to Tokyo, they sent a mental health team with them. And I think it said on average, they were receiving 10 daily requests about concerns of other Olympians, but it wasn't directly from the athletes. It was from people around them. The tips were coming. So I'm like, that's probably the same with our high school kids. It's probably not directly coming from them.
Right.
It's coming from people around them. I think watching to see if the kid hangs out, if the kid's usually known to hang out and joke after practice, does he start leaving all of a sudden or missing practices? Suicide, it is one of those hard things to notice because they do try to hide it so well.
Right.
But I think changes in friends, any weight loss or weight gain, avoiding practices, maybe just looking lethargic on the court where they usually have a lot of energy.
Right.
I said I thought it should be integrated, like when you were talking about the OHSA forms. I mean, there are a little more screeners that are a little more detailed that would be nice. It would be emailed to the team and each person fill it out themselves and send it back just to kind of check and see how they're doing. Because most kids are usually pretty honest on those. Well, and that might open the door up that we're open to mental health and we're here for you and we are comfortable talking about it. Which I think what you guys can do, if there's ever a kid that you're worried about or you just kind of feel like, I think it would be worth talking to them about getting a referral for them for counseling, and that, that would not affect their playing time or, your view of them as playing the sport. But it would be better to have an evaluation and just them to talk to someone than think, I wonder what would happen, what ifs. And kids often have a very different view on mental health. I mean, I think that's a difference with kids nowadays, is they're much more willing to seek treatment. It's not seen as an embarrassment or that you don't talk about your feelings, that those kind of mindset. Research kind of shows kids that play sports have lower levels of depression or anxiety. And so often, that's why I always encourage kids to get involved in something, be involved, pick something you like, try it out.
Well, Matt, that's some really good information. I guess I just have one follow-up question for you, and then as you're answering there, feel free to go into your final thoughts, and then I'll close us out. I kind of had a final thought that I wanted to go with, but first, let me throw this question at you. In terms of when I hear it's important for us to recognize change. The first thing that makes me think of is, well, we have to have great foundation knowledge of who our people are, right?
Right.
And again, we've been doing this so much with kids. I think it's a responsibility to each other, right? This is our colleagues. This is adults. These are kids. These are people in our community. Anyone and everyone. But it's those relationships, and it's that foundation piece of knowing and having those close-knit relationships to where these people, a little bit about them, a little bit about their families, a little bit about their schooling, a little bit about their different things, to where you can best recognize the changes. So I guess that's the first thing that came to my mind. Do you follow me there, Matt? Like if you as an athletic administrator are seeing changes in a coach, or you as a coach are seeing changes in a player, or maybe a colleague or a fellow coach, don't you feel like a real key in understanding that is to have that day-to-day relationship and understanding a little bit about that person?
Yeah, and I think that we've talked about on this show, it seems like millions of times, the importance of relationships, right? We're in the relationship business, really, as a coach. I mean, you're dealing with kids, you're dealing with coaches, coaching staffs. You really, relationships are the foundations of everything we're trying to do, if you think about it. And it's no different here with this mental health issue, because I think those relationships lead to the knowledge that you need to recognize some of these warning signs that Julie mentioned tonight. And I guess, Shayne, you said kind of go into my final thoughts, and I guess if I were going to do that, I would say this: when I went into this show, when we started tackling this show this week and preparing for it, um, I felt like I had a decent grasp on what I wanted to talk about. And as I got into this conversation with Julie, some things came up that had me thinking differently. Truthfully, I told her at the end of our conversation, I actually learned quite a bit in a hour long talk with her, really, or less than that. And it really, I think honestly, it took me to a place where we need to get to a place where we start taking this seriously. I think as coaches and as leaders, because if you think about it, we take the physical part of what we do very, very seriously, right? We come out every day, whatever sport we're coaching, we practice, we drill, we practice fundamentals. We want to get better at what we do. Over the last decade, especially maybe 15 years, working on our bodies has become more important, right? I mean, you're seeing these kids go to these individual trainers now, and they're working on becoming more explosive and stronger, and so that they can perform better, so that they prevent injuries better. All these things, right? Nutrition, and now it seems like the mental side hasn't caught up to the physical side. I don't know that because we talk mental health, but even like, how much do we really, as coaches, work on the mental side of the games that we coach? How much do we work on, how do you become more confident? How do you focus better? How do you, just not even the mental health stuff that we've talked about tonight, but just the mental side of the game. Do we honestly think we even come close to putting as much time and effort into the mental side of the game as we do the physical side of the game as coaches? I don't think we do. I mean, I just don't think there's any way that we match those two. And I think that what this show tonight and the conversation that we had with Julie and then some of the stuff we talked about tonight, what it proves to me is that we need to start treating the mental side of things at least close to us the same as we do the physical side. I understand that when you're coaching a sport, it may not be able to be a 50-50 mix all the time. Okay. But we need to give some more priority, or a higher priority, I should say, to the mental side of things. I guess that's the one thing I take from this. And hopefully some of the suggestions we made here toward the end and some of the suggestions Julie made, maybe some coaches can take those and use those.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. I think, when I talked earlier about, we have to care, and I talked about, compassion and awareness and responsibility and education. I do want to say that I'm around some incredible people each and every day, and over my 25 years now as coaching, teaching, now trying this principle thing out. It's I've been very fortunate, and 95 to 100% of the people I've come in contact with, Matt, I do believe care. I do believe, we may disagree on how to teach this or how to coach this or whatever, but I do think there's a true compassion and caring for young people. And I think that's a neat thing. And I think as more and more awareness is being brought, I think the thing that we've probably need to take the next step on is the responsibility and the educating. And I hope that's kind of what we've been able to start here tonight a little bit, because, man, as I think back, I've watched some people, in our area, people, close to us or close to some people that I know, and different things that have really struggled through this. In some cases, they've lost loved ones and so forth. And I think that's that compassion that you see, and you feel like, man, I want to get more involved. I want to take more responsibility. I want to educate myself on this a little bit more, so that if I can, as you said earlier, Matt, if we can just influence, one or two people throughout, our experience of working with young people, man, it's worth it. So I guess my challenge to people would be, hey, I don't doubt that you care. I don't doubt that you're not becoming more and more aware of it. I think I would challenge you to accept that responsibility and to really join us in trying to educate ourselves a little bit, because I'm not going to sit here tonight and act like I have all the answers. But what I do want to sit here tonight is taking a step of accepting more responsibility to find more answers, right? I want to educate myself a little bit more so that I can better help young people, I can better help colleagues, and so forth as we move forward. So really, Matt, I can't thank Julie enough for joining us.
Right.
I thought the comments were outstanding. Yeah. Anything else before I close this out? I didn't want to shut you off there.
No. I think it's one of these shows where I know when we listen back to it, we'll think, man, I wish I'd have said this, or we should have added this, because it's just such a complex issue, Shayne. It's not something you're going to cover in a 45-minute to an hour podcast or whatever. But I hope, like you said, that maybe it at least, I've always said, when people listen to the show and it ends, I hope if they're driving in their car, it causes them to think for 10 more minutes about it, and if that's the case, then we've sort of done what we hope to do, and hopefully it'll, spark some conversations down the road.
Well, it is, and I think I'd go back to something we said earlier, the great Michael Phelps, when he says it's okay not to be okay. I think that's what we're talking about here. We're not perfect. Again, bring more awareness to it, and help each other fight these fights that are out there. So again, thank you, Julie. Thank you, Matt. Great show, expanding the zone. Here we are on what was the show 35. Check out the YouTube channel. We always try to put one of these out every week or within a couple weeks span, and then obviously with high school sports up and running, you can check out my different interviews and some of the different SVC Sports Talk Plus stuff that I put out there to cover some of our kids in the area. So on that note, we'll get out of here. Look forward to great feedback. Check us out, SVC Sports Zone, on Facebook or on Twitter. Let us know. I'd love to have some follow-up on this particular show, that we can continue to grow this topic and help in any way we can. Thanks, everyone.